LemonTubeAmiga presents a Playguide and video review. Sit back and enjoy the show.
Hey there once again, welcome to another Lemon64 play guide and review. This game was voted for by a number of fans on the Lemon64 website, so it gives me great pleasure to bring to you Paradroid, developed by Graftgold and published by Hewson in 1985. In this mech shooting god sim, we control a helmet, and using this helmet we can influence a number of robots inside a huge spaceship, and once all those robots are cleared on that level, then that freighter is clear from enemies and we can move on to the next ship in the fleet. There are 8 ships to tackle in this game, and once every single ship is cleared of robots, then you get to tackle the 8th ship again, and this time with harder robots. So let's press fire and jump into this game and check this out. You can see in this game it's a top-down view shooter, and by pressing fire there we can direct our laser blasts towards those enemies. By holding down the fire button, then we will activate the influence device, and that means that we can actually take control of one of those enemy robots and try to mind wrestle that thing into the ground. You can see we start off with the 001 influence device, and we are attempting to transfer that onto the body of a messenger robot. Now we enter a sub-game, and in here we get to choose which side that we want to play from, and all we must do is to highlight the yellow areas, and to get more yellow on our side of the board, then the opposite robot can get purple. And so it will flash there when there are equal amounts of colours on each side, and if we fail to wrestle the control away from that robot, that will enter a deadlock situation, and here we are given one more try. At the end of this one more try, if we fail to beat that robot, and we fail to put more yellow onto our side of the board, then unfortunately it's game over and we die. And we have scored the lowest score of the day there at precisely 0 points, and so let's press fire again and let's see if we can score any more than 0. In this game it's important to keep an eye on the numbers above those robots' heads, because that denotes how quick they are and how armoured they are and how much firepower you're going to have to launch into those to blow them up. So any robot which is above 300 will be difficult at this stage, because we only have the 001 influence device under our control, and the robots in this game go up to 999, which are very heavily armoured, and it will take some firepower to blow those things up. We will also find computers scattered around the level, and in here we can check out a deck map of the ship which highlights the lifts which may be important, and you can see there what deck we are on. So the ship comprises of 20 decks, and we have to clear all those decks of robots, either by blowing all those away using our firepower, or if we take control of robots, that will influence it and that will blow up our previous robot, so we can influence our way around the ship. Let's try to take on another enemy, and this time it's a 247 droid, so we were trying to tackle a 300 droid before, and that's maybe a little too hard. You'll find these droids will move more quickly the higher the rating that they are, so let's select the side, and it gives us a countdown so that we can't take forever deciding on the side that we wish to choose, and by moving the arrow up and down there with the joystick and pressing fire, we can make a connection, and if that lands on a purple square it will turn yellow, and you can see I took over that droid using that technique. Now that we have a 247 droid, our laser blasts will be much more effective, and you can see it still takes 2 shots to knock out those 300 droids, but 200 droids can be wiped out with 1 shot. Sometimes rooms contain absolutely nothing, and in this game we find a number of lifts, which are those square items on the floor there. And you'll also find shield recharge pads, which are these glowing items, and here the player can take maybe 2 or 3 hits before they get blown up, depending on the firepower that they get hit with. But if they hit one of those shield recharge points, they'll get that shield back. Unfortunately, that wipes off some score, so you can recharge your shields at the expense of score. It's great to see that we can bounce off enemies and use those physics, and when we kill the last enemy there, that means the lights go out on the deck, and that means the deck is clear. All we have to do now is to find one of those lifts and operate that. By holding down that fire button, we can now use that lift, which is highlighted in white, and move to any level along that section. So let's choose the top level. But as each deck contains a variance of enemies, some of those are really hard, and if you get hit by those even on the diagonal, you'll get blown up, and that's game over. Well, that didn't go very well at all, so let's try it for the third and final time on this game, and let's see if we can't get any further. You may notice the player gets a tremendous score by clearing the levels, and of course once all the levels are clear, it makes traversing this massive ship much easier. It also helps to memorize a path through the ship, and finding those lowly ranked robots to secure yourself a higher ranked robot. And hopefully if you have a 600 series robot, that should be easier against those difficult enemies on those hard decks. And you might find a 999 robot periodically in the game, and that robot is actually unstable, so you won't be able to capture that robot for any great length of time, but that does have a fast speed and very powerful lasers. So control in this game is reasonable as long as the player remembers to turn in the direction that they want to fire before they do so, and sometimes if the player just presses up and tries to realign themselves in that narrow corridor, that will fire in the up direction until you pull left and right and realign those guns. This mechanic can feel a little strange at first, and there is inertia on that robot, so it won't stop dead on the spot either. So sometimes you have to get used to not being able to run away and fire at the rear. And well, that's the first deck cleared again. The first deck is usually the easiest, and you can see we've captured a robot there so that we have more power, and this is the deck that we got killed on before. So we can take maybe 2 or 3 hits there until we get blown up, but let's choose an easy deck. And the game will remember each and every enemy on the level, so if you have blown one up, it will memorize that, so you don't find a respawn of all the enemies, simply moving between the decks. And so you can see there the green levels, and the colours of the decks don't change unfortunately after you've cleared those, and it might have been a good idea to do that. You can see some decks are very tiny indeed, so rather than try to blow this thing up, let's enter the transfusion game itself, and let's see if we can interfere with this thing and influence that device. The map is split from the very easy sections there, which only take seconds to knock out, between the ones that require lots of tracking around large mazes, and if you know your way around those mazes, that's great, and at least the game gives us a computer so that we can find where we are. And it's not so hard to get lost in this game, so at least the levels don't require us to rely on those maps. You can see there 2 robots, and sometimes you can fire straight through those. So sometimes the hit detection is great, but sometimes, unless you get that spot on the enemy, and you will hear the sound effect when you hit that shield, then sometimes those laser blasts will pass straight through, and sometimes that's not really appreciated. But if you take that into account and hit those dead on, you can see we can really make some great progress. And sometimes the enemies which have a lesser number than we have will fail to even fire on our current candidate. So sometimes it's best to high rank those other robots, and then they won't interfere too much with our progress. Unfortunately, I don't think there is a way of finding out how many robots there are on any particular level, and maybe that's an option in the computer that I haven't found, but that certainly would have been helpful. You can also see the guns take a little time to recharge, so you can't fire rapidly into those enemies, but again, because we've only got a 300 series, the later series robots will be able to fire more rapidly, and they can deliver a bigger impact as well. So again, we failed to find the last robot on that level, so let's move up, and some of these top levels are pretty easy, and what I like to do, rather than take these on with firepower, I like to simply try to merge with those and use the influence device to take on control. And sometimes the robots on that top level won't even fire towards us unless we fire upon them, so if we simply take influence measures before they even get a sight on us, then we can simply go in there and influence those guys out of the picture. The interface device is pretty hectic, and I really like this sub-game. It doesn't take very long to find out what the player has to do there, and sometimes it's a race and it's a great challenge between you and the opponent, but it's also a great feeling when you get all the colours heading your way, and it's also a great feeling there when the lights go out. So according to the game programmers, once the last robot leaves that particular level, all the lights go out, but we are a robot on that level, so that's kind of mysterious that the lights aren't activated by ourselves. But perhaps we are a floating influence device and not a robot in fact at all. So you can see there, I can fire diagonally, and like Whizball there, it becomes a firefight sometimes, firing on that diagonal, and sometimes these levels aren't easy. Luckily we can always backtrack and leg it out of there. You can hear very minimal music and sound effects have been provided in this game, and the music was created by Steve Turner, and so there is enough here to flash out the game. And the colour schemes on offer, if we check out these graphics, are in pastel colours mostly, and the grey there is a great effect when that level is clear. So the colour scheme on the lowly Commodore 64 has been put to great use, and sometimes these colour schemes are a little garish, but again we can see what's going on even with these patterns on the background, and it's not hard to figure out where we're going because there isn't too much to interact with on these levels. So another computer screen there, a few more lifts, and a few more robots to get rid of. And I found a dead end there. So sometimes exploring different sections, we're now entering the cargo hold it seems, and because we have a 500 series robot, the enemies won't fire unless they are fired upon. So you can see the graphics there are great, nice big chunky graphics, and the sound effects, look at that firepower there. The sound effects really give away when we are taking heat, but we can't see how many shields we have remaining. To add insult to our injury, we can only maintain existence inside a robot shell for a limited period. You can see I'm flashing there, that means I have to inhabit another robot pretty quickly, otherwise I'll blow up. And so touching another robot with no shields remaining, or failing to find another robot within that time, will cause us to find an early death. So that's Hewson's Paradroid, developed by Graftgold there, and fortunately Graftgold came back the next year and created Paradroid, the Heavy Metal Edition. So let's check out the Heavy Metal Edition, and you'll find the colour schemes have changed, and the graphics are more or less the same, but you can find a very nice metal effect there, and you will also find that the movement of this next edition is actually a little quicker, although the bonus game speed doesn't really change, and that's great because that moves at a fast speed already. Just like the previous Paradroid, if you fail to take over the very first one, then you will die, and there's no way around it. So the trick to this game is to accumulate some score before you take on some enemies, and then that means if we don't take over that enemy, we will simply lose score, and we won't die just like that. That's right, sometimes we can fail to take over these enemies, and when that happens we will simply be kicked out of that body and we'll simply lose some score. So let's find some robots there and let's acquire a few hundred, and it's a great idea to lose score instead of lives in this game, but as you've seen, it is easy to die in this game, and I have died mercilessly time and time again. So the heavy metal edition does add something to the experience. Better graphics there slightly, better colour schemes, and a faster main robot as well. And the speed of our robot will actually depend on our host as well, and some series are very much slower than others, and sometimes the maybe 600 or 700 series is very slow, even though it has massive firepower, and sometimes even the bigger series are heavier, so they carry much more inertia. So sometimes the lighter ones move more quickly, and so you can see there the enemies, we can fire through doors still, as long as we time those shots, and the laser recharges periodically. But sometimes we must bump our way through those, and it's great to see those physics bumping away. The playability, once the player realises what they must do on these levels, it isn't too difficult to figure out, and it can be a really great experience clearing these levels quickly and gaining lots of score there, and those small levels really make this clearing of the spaceship a joy. And there are 8 ships in this game, but it is an infinitely cycling game, and so you won't be able to complete it, and the best players have obviously accumulated tens of thousands of score, but at the moment I'm simply hoping to gain more than the 3000 score we scored on the normal edition. So while you continue to see me doing that, I'll just give you a little history about this game. Paradroid was coded by Andrew Braybrook, and he did virtually all the coding with a little help from Steve Turner, who also provided the music and the sound effects. The history of Paradroid begins with the formation of Hewson Consultants by Andrew Hewson in 1981, and after publishing 1 or 2 titles himself for the ZX, he then employed Steve Turner, who created the 3D Space Wars trilogy for them in the early 1980s, and the Commodore 64 gained 3D Lunar Attack in 1984. Shortly after this time, Steve Turner met with Andrew Braybrook, because Andrew was the bass player in the band that they were both in, and they were both coding games in their spare time for the ZX machines, and thanks to Andrew Hewson's money, Steve Turner created Graftgold. Andrew Braybrook's first game was Gribbly's Day Out, which appeared on the 64 in 1985. The team went on to Paradroid in 1985, and Zap actually gave that a making of diary as well, which is quite interesting to read. Paradroid was actually converted by Steve Turner onto the ZX machine on a game known as Quasitron, and that appeared in 1986. Andrew Braybrook and Graftgold went on to Uridium in 1986. Ranorama appeared on the Spectrum in 86, and the 88 version on the 64. Heavy Metal Paradroid, which you're seeing at the moment, was also released in 86. Soldier of Fortune, which was released on the Firebird label in 88, which was a Ghosts and Goblins quite difficult rip-off. And then we move on to Rainbow Islands, which was another Andrew Braybrook Graftgold game, released in 1989 for the Commodore 64, and 1990 saw the Amiga conversion. The very last game on the C64 was Ivan Stewart's Super Off-Road Racer, which was released in 1989, and then basically Graftgold moved on to the Amiga. Hewson Consultants also employed other programmers to code their games, and they took on classics like Southern Belle and Cybernoid 1 and 2, created by Raphael Seco in 1987, and Synapse. They also teamed up with John Phillips to create Nebulous, and Stormlord was another one of their games, as well as 1988 Zamzara. They closed their doors in 1991 when all their assets of Hewson moved over to their sister company 21st Century Entertainment. 21st Century Entertainment then spawned a number of companies on its own, including DICE, otherwise known as Digital Illusions, which created the Pinball series and later the Battlefront series, and they also created Spidersoft. But unfortunately by the year 2000, the last remnants of the 21st Century Empire had crumbled, and so Hewson were no more. Returning once again, we find we are still in the battle there, trying to acquire a new robot on the Commodore 64, and it's not looking too healthy there, with not much score in the bank, and it really does take time and dedication to take away maybe a few hours of your day to play this all the way through. Some of the sound effects in the background and on the title screen remind me of Whizball. Those incidental sound effects are there, and the SID chip again on the Commodore 64 is a great asset to that machine. Furious battles in the minigames are also a great asset to this game, and we can see we are virtually match to match there, head for head, so it does sometimes give us extra time to score an extra point over that computer, but again if it's deadlock then we'll have to try that again, and it can be off-putting if we don't have any score. But look at that, a whitewash almost over the computer there. And that's another deck cleared. So we're approaching now, we're over the 3,000 that we scored before. Let's see if we can score at least another 1,000 on this game. Unfortunately, I am not going to complete this game or any of the ships involved with it. And I didn't really play much of this game at the time, because it seemed quite huge and daunting to move around a massive spaceship, blasting away without any clear idea what I was supposed to be doing, and it looked really too daunting for its own good. But playing this now in the 2000s, I find that this ship is nicely sparsed and there isn't too much going on to distract the player, and sometimes they can play this tactically or they can go in there all guns blazing. But because things are at random sometimes, you may just find a very difficult robot there to take over as a new host, and maybe this is a parasite simulator because we do have to merge and get our way across these levels and take over the rest of these levels, almost like a parasite invading a human body. So you can see there we are chasing around those things, and we cannot see them when they move behind doors and in some of the rooms, as well we wouldn't be able to see those in real life if we were playing this, so they only appear on the room that we are in, and that's another one of those great features which programmers think about and maybe games players appreciate. It's also great that the game gives us a limited time inside each body shell, and we'll have to take over hosts whether we like that or not. So let's attempt to do that, and because we are similarly matched, it's best if you get in there before the computer gets a few lines together. And you may notice we're actually playing on the right there as the white robot, and so we have to gain more purple if we play on the right and more yellow if we play on the left, and so we've got that robot, he disappears, we get that score. So we can play different aspects of that bonus round, and that's certainly a welcome feature. As for playability in this game, yes, if you do understand this game and you sneak around these levels and take great shots there, sometimes it's a great feeling moving from deck to deck and getting those spaces cleared. But unfortunately those decks do not highlight in different colours when we clear those on the map, and that's a shame, and it doesn't tell us how many robots we have per deck to clear, and that's a shame as well. But those inadequacies aside, this game definitely has deep character, deep atmosphere and sometimes even a sense of humour. But most of the time the player will be on their toes and either trying to battle their way with these sub-games or taking on those robots hand-to-hand combat. So it is deep, but it isn't too deep to get the player into, so under the surface it isn't hard at all. Moving on to the scores. The lowest score was granted by a Commodore user who actually gave this 50%. Your Commodore gave this game 60%. Computer and Video Games Magazine gave this 80%. Commodore Force gave this game 96%. And Zap gave Paradroid 97% there in November '85, praising everything about it. I think this game, with an average score there of perhaps 8 out of 10, it's still a masterpiece, and it's just a shame that we die periodically. Sometimes that's not our fault. Paradroid 90 appeared in 1990 there for the Commodore Amiga, and you can see and hear the Commodore Amiga version, and again that was updated by Andrew Braybrook with additional help by Steve Turner. So you can see the graphics have immediately been updated for this version, and the flow and the presentation of the game. And so let's press fire and we will find exactly the same format as the previous games, except this time the graphics have certainly taken on a much more 16-bit quality. And so for the last few moments of this review, let's just check out the Amiga version, and we won't be playing very far in this basically because I can't get anywhere with it. And so we can see we are still the 001 unit there, but we don't have numbers above those guys' heads, so that takes away an element of this game. We can't tell how strong we are compared to the others. And when I pull out my influence device there, that probe looks a little weird, but we can use that to attach to other robots, and there hopefully we'll find a very similar game. So let's try that transfer. Again, it gives the player time to swap sides, and then the time starts ticking down, and we have to match those colours. And so again, we are on the left, so we have to find those yellow tokens. If we can, that's great, and if we can't, guess what happens? Just like the original Paradroids on the Commodore 64, it certainly is easy to lose lives in this game, and you'll find yourself returning to the title screen, sometimes in frustration. It doesn't begin very easy, like the Commodore 64, so you have to be on your best behaviour if you want to get anywhere. You can see the graphics was developed by John Cumming as well, and Jason Page actually helped with the music and the sound effects in this game. So great music and great graphics have been added to the Paradroid experience, and I know some players absolutely adore this game and couldn't rate this highly enough. It's just as deep as the Commodore 64 version, and there's practically just as little to interact with on these levels. It looks prettier, but it's a series of robots, and you can see the computer screens there. Let's see if we can interact with those. We can find the usual ship info and the deck data. So we can check out those maps there, and we can see lights lit, droids on the deck 4 there, and droids on the ship 76. So on the Amiga version it does provide those stats, and I'm not sure that they were available on the Commodore 64, but maybe I just didn't find those in time for this review. You may be able to tell I never really played this when I was younger. I never really had this game, and so reviewing this is basically one of my very first experiences with this game. And so crashing out incessantly and having to restart back on the title screen by playing this game for mere seconds isn't my idea of heaven, and they could have made this game a little more easier for the novice and to introduce the player to this concept. And players who haven't played the 64 version may be very much infuriated with this game, and it can be very much infuriating. On the Amiga, Andrew has also created an energy meter there on the very top corner, and that denotes our shield. So on the Amiga, we can visually see our shield, and we don't have to guess by the number of hits we've taken along the way. So we can see the shield is halfway down there, so we're going to have to be careful. And so let's try to influence another one of those things. This time it doesn't give us a description of the robot that we are about to tackle and the numbers and that kind of thing. So sometimes the player is going into this slightly blind, not knowing what robot they are taking on and how powerful that may be. And to my mind, that decreases the layer of depth in this game, because on the C64 version it gave us the robots and the numbers, and so that is sadly missed on the Amiga. It seems the whole point of the C64 version was to rise up the ranks and to see if we are above others, whether they will fire upon us or not, and to find that elusive 999 robot. But on the Amiga, even that 999 goes out of the window, because we do not have numbers of the robots on the screen. So the Amiga has taken a number of liberties there, and you won't find identical maps either. The Amiga has its own maps and its own variety of enemies, so it's almost a different game, but they have kept a very similar formula. On the Amiga, they give this an average score of 8.5 out of 10, and that's pretty similar to the current LemonTubeAmiga website rating by the fans of this game. And there are many fans of this game who can complete this probably and play this a lot easier than I am at the moment. So you can see, for my money, fancy graphics doesn't help this playability, and to the novice who doesn't even understand this game, perhaps the Amiga version is probably the hardest to get into of them all. While you see me dying, I'll just say thank you once again for joining me on another Playguide and review of another C64 classic, and Paradroid is certainly a C64 classic, so I hope you can join me again on another C64 Playguide and review sometime soon. Thank you.